She said, "You have to ask me before touching her." I replied, "That's my wife." She said, "As long as I live with you, I decide what's allowed and what's not." My wife stayed silent. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. 3 months ago, I was the happiest guy alive, fresh from my honeymoon, thinking life couldn't get better. Now I'm sitting in my car at 2 a.m. outside a gas station because I can't handle being in my own house anymore. Let me back up. My wife and I dated for 4 years before getting married. Her mother always seemed a bit intense, but I figured that's just how some mothers are with their daughters, protective, you know? During our engagement, she made a few comments about how I better take good care of her daughter, the usual stuff. I brushed it off because honestly, I was head over heels and nothing could dampen my mood. The wedding was beautiful. Small ceremony, close family and friends. Her mother gave this speech about how her daughter was her precious gift to the world and how she trusted me to honor that gift. It was sweet, actually. I felt like I was being welcomed into the family properly. Here's where things get weird. 2 weeks after we got back from our honeymoon, her mother shows up at our door with 3 suitcases. Apparently, there was some issue with her apartment, something about the landlord selling the building and her lease ending early. She needed a place to stay for a few weeks while she found something new. My wife immediately said yes without even asking me, but I figured it's family, right? How hard could a few weeks be? The first week was fine. She mostly kept to herself, helped with cooking, seemed genuinely grateful. But then small things started happening. She'd interrupt us when we were talking on the couch together. She'd find reasons to need my wife's attention right when we were having a moment. When I'd reach for my wife's hand during dinner, I'd catch her mother staring at us with this weird expression. Then came the night that changed everything. My wife was washing dishes after dinner, and I came up behind her to wrap my arms around her waist. Nothing crazy, just a simple hug from behind while she worked. That's when her mother appeared in the doorway like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She cleared her throat and said those words that still make my blood boil. "Excuse me, but you need to ask my permission before touching my daughter like that." I thought she was joking. I actually laughed and said something like, "Good one," and kept my arms around my wife. But her mother's face was stone serious. She repeated herself, adding that as long as she was living in our house, she had a say in how we behaved toward each other. I looked at my wife, expecting her to tell her mother she was being ridiculous. Instead, she gently pulled away from me and said we should all just try to get along while her mother was staying with us. She didn't defend me. She didn't tell her mother to back off. She just gave in. That night, I tried to talk to my wife about it when we went to bed. I told her how uncomfortable the whole thing made me, how it felt like her mother was trying to control our relationship. My wife got defensive, saying her mother was just protective and going through a hard time with the housing situation. She asked me to be patient and understanding. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. Her mother would hover whenever we were in the same room. If I tried to hold my wife's hand while watching TV, she'd make some comment about inappropriate displays. When I kissed my wife goodbye before leaving for work, she'd be right there, watching, sometimes even commenting on how that's not how proper married couples behave. The breaking point came last week. I got home from a really rough day, and all I wanted was to hug my wife and feel better. She was in the kitchen making dinner, and I walked over to give her a quick hug and maybe rest my head on her shoulder for a second. Before I could even touch her, her mother appeared and literally stepped between us. She looked me dead in the eye and said I needed to ask permission first. When I asked what she meant, she explained that since her daughter was her baby, any physical contact between us needed her approval. She said it was about respect and proper boundaries. I lost it. I told her this was insane, that we were married adults, that she had no right to control how I interacted with my own wife. Her mother shot back that as long as she was living under our roof, she had every right to set rules about what she was comfortable witnessing. The worst part? My wife sided with her mother. She said I was being dramatic and that it wouldn't kill me to just ask first to keep the peace. She said it was temporary and that I should be more considerate of her mother's feelings. I've been sleeping on the couch for a week now. Every time I try to show my wife any affection, her mother intervenes or makes some comment. I feel like a stranger in my own house, like I'm being treated as some kind of threat to my own wife. I don't know what to do. The few weeks have turned into over a month, and there's no end in sight to her mother's stay. My wife seems to think this is all normal, but I feel like I'm going crazy. Am I overreacting here? Is this something couples actually have to deal with? Update 1. Holy hell, you guys. I wasn't expecting this to blow up like it did, But reading all your comments gave me the push I needed to actually do something about this situation. Some of you really opened my eyes to how messed up this whole thing has become. So I took the advice about having a serious conversation with my wife. I waited until her mother went out for groceries yesterday and sat my wife down for what I thought would be a heart-to-heart about our relationship and boundaries. It did not go the way I expected. I started by explaining how isolated and controlled I felt, how her mother's behavior was affecting our marriage. I told her I felt like she was choosing her mother over our relationship and that something needed to change. I suggested maybe we could help her mother find her own place faster, or at least establish some ground rules about privacy and physical affection between us. My wife listened quietly, nodding along, and I thought I was finally getting through to her. Then she dropped a bombshell that made everything so much worse. She told me her mother wasn't actually having housing problems. Her lease didn't end early, and her landlord isn't selling the building. Her mother asked to move in with us right after we got back from our honeymoon because she was concerned about our marriage and wanted to make sure I was treating her daughter right. I sat there trying to process this information. My wife had been lying to me for over a month about why her mother was living with us. But it gets worse. She then explained that her mother had been observing our relationship and had some concerns about my behavior. Apparently, I was too physical and demanding with my affection. Her mother felt that I was being aggressive in how I approached intimacy and that someone needed to teach me proper boundaries. I asked what the hell she was talking about. I've never been anything but loving and respectful with my wife. I've never pressured her into anything or been rough or demanding. The most aggressive thing I do is hug her from behind while she's cooking. That's when my wife said something that made my blood run cold. She said her mother had been helping her see that some of my behavior was problematic and that maybe her mother was right about needing permission for physical contact. She said it made her feel safer and more in control. I asked her if she actually felt unsafe with me before her mother moved in. She got quiet and said no, but that her mother had helped her realize that she should have more say in when and how I touched her. I told her that was insane, that married couples don't ask permission to hug each other, and that her mother was manipulating both of us. That's when she got angry and accused me of not respecting her autonomy and trying to dismiss her feelings. The conversation ended with her storming out to meet her mother for lunch, leaving me alone in the house trying to figure out what the hell had happened to my marriage. When they came back later, both of them sat me down for what they called a family meeting. Her mother had apparently told my wife about our conversation, and they had decided together that some new rules needed to be established. The rules were insane. I couldn't touch my wife without asking first. I couldn't enter our bedroom if the door was closed without knocking and waiting for permission. I couldn't kiss her goodbye or hello without checking if it was appropriate timing. And if her mother felt uncomfortable with any interaction between us, I had to stop immediately. I asked what would happen if I didn't follow these rules. Her mother said I would need to find somewhere else to stay until I learned to respect boundaries. I looked at my wife, waiting for her to tell her mother she was being ridiculous. Instead, she nodded and said she thought the rules were fair and would help everyone feel more comfortable. I've been staying at a friend's place for the past 2 days. My wife has texted me a few times asking when I'm coming home and if I'm ready to work together on this. She doesn't seem to understand that I'm not the problem here. I keep thinking about our relationship before her mother moved in. We were happy, affectionate, normal. Now I'm being treated like some kind of predator who can't be trusted around his own wife. I don't know if my marriage is salvageable at this point. How do you come back from your spouse allowing her mother to control your relationship to this extent? And how do you trust someone who lied to you about something this major? Update 2. I've been getting a lot of messages asking for another update, so here it is. Things have escalated in ways I never saw coming, and I'm honestly not sure if I should be relieved or terrified about what's happened. I stayed at my friend's place for about a week and a half, hoping some space would help my wife see how crazy this situation had become. During that time, she'd call me every day asking when I was coming home and if I was ready to compromise. Every conversation felt like she was reading from a script her mother had written for her. Then, about 4 days ago, I got a call from my wife's sister. She lives about 3 hours away and hadn't been around much since the wedding, so I was surprised to hear from her. She asked if we could meet for coffee because she had some things to tell me about her mother and sister that I needed to know. I drove out to meet her yesterday, and what she told me changed everything I thought I knew about this situation. Apparently, this isn't the first time her mother has done something like this. When her sister was married 5 years ago, their mother pulled similar stunts. She'd find reasons to insert herself into their relationship, criticize how her brother-in-law treated her daughter, and create drama around physical affection and boundaries. The sister told me it got so bad that her husband eventually gave up and left. But here's the part that really messed me up. Her sister said this was always their mother's plan. She doesn't want either of her daughters to have successful marriages because she can't stand the idea of not being the most important person in their lives. She systematically sabotages their relationships by convincing them that their partners are somehow inadequate or dangerous. The sister also told me that my wife has been calling her almost daily since her mother moved in, but not to complain about the situation. She's been calling to get validation that her mother is right about me being too demanding and not respectful enough. She's been painting me as this controlling, aggressive person who doesn't understand boundaries. I felt sick hearing this. The woman I married, who I thought I knew completely, had been building a case against me with her family while pretending to be supportive to my face. The sister then dropped the biggest bombshell. She told me that my wife had never actually wanted to get married. She'd been pressured into it by social expectations and her friends, but she confided to her sister multiple times that she felt trapped and wasn't sure if she was ready for marriage. Her mother had been feeding into these doubts from the beginning, apparently telling her that marriage was a mistake and that she should keep her options open. When I asked why she was telling me all this, the sister said she was tired of watching her mother destroy her daughter's chances at happiness. She said she regretted not speaking up during her own marriage crisis, and she didn't want to make the same mistake again. She also told me something that made my blood run cold. Her mother had been planning to suggest that my wife file for divorce soon, claiming that I was becoming increasingly unstable and potentially dangerous. The whole permission thing was apparently designed to create a paper trail of me being controlling and not respecting boundaries. I drove home in a daze, trying to process everything. When I got back to my friend's place, I found several missed calls from my wife and a voicemail saying she needed to talk to me urgently. I called her back, and she sounded panicked. She said her mother had been acting strange lately, making comments about how maybe I wasn't coming back and how that might be for the best. She said she was starting to feel like her mother was trying to break us up, and she didn't know what to do. I told her I was coming home and that we needed to have a serious conversation without her mother present. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near our house. When I saw her, she looked exhausted and confused. I asked her directly if she actually believed I was aggressive or demanding, or if she felt unsafe with me. She broke down crying and admitted that she'd never felt unsafe with me, but that her mother had been so insistent that there were problems that she'd started to doubt her own feelings. She said her mother would spend hours talking to her about red flags and warning signs, pointing out things I did that were supposedly concerning. She'd been so overwhelmed by her mother's constant analysis of our relationship that she'd started to believe maybe her mother was seeing things she was missing. I told her what her sister had shared with me, and she went pale. She said she'd had no idea about what happened with her sister's marriage, and that her mother had always told her the divorce was because her brother-in-law was abusive. We talked for hours. She admitted that having her mother live with us had been her idea, not because of housing problems, but because she'd been feeling overwhelmed by marriage and thought her mother could help her adjust to being a wife. She said she'd never intended for things to get so controlling and weird. She also confessed that she'd been having doubts about marriage in general, not about me specifically, but about whether she was ready for such a big commitment. Her mother had been feeding into those doubts instead of helping her work through them. By the end of our conversation, she was angry, not at me, but at her mother for manipulating both of us. She said she wanted to go home and confront her mother together, to tell her she needed to leave immediately and stop interfering in our marriage. We drove back to the house together, both of us nervous about what we'd find. Her mother was waiting in the living room like she'd been expecting us. The moment we walked in together, her face changed to this cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. My wife started to tell her mother that she needed to pack her things and leave, but her mother cut her off. She launched into this speech about how I was clearly manipulating her daughter, how I'd probably filled her head with lies, and how she was just trying to protect her from making a huge mistake. Then she said something that made everything click into place. She told my wife that she'd raised her to be independent and strong, and that marriage was just a way for men to control and dominate women. She said she'd made the mistake of not protecting her other daughter, but she wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. My wife told her mother that she was wrong, that our marriage was her choice, and that she needed to respect that choice and leave our house. Her mother's response was to pack her bags and leave, but not before telling my wife that when our marriage fell apart, She shouldn't come crying to her for help. She left yesterday morning, and the house feels different already. My wife and I spent the day talking about everything that had happened, about her doubts and fears, about how her mother had manipulated both of us, and about what we wanted our marriage to look like going forward. Final update. It's been 6 weeks since her mother left, and I wanted to give everyone a final update on how things turned out. The first few weeks were rough, not gonna lie. My wife and I had to basically start over in a lot of ways, learning how to be married without her mother's constant interference and manipulation. There were a lot of difficult conversations about trust, boundaries, and what we both actually wanted from our relationship. My wife started keeping a journal to help her separate her own thoughts and feelings from her mother's influence. She realized how much her mother's constant commentary had affected her ability to trust her own instincts about our relationship. Some days were harder than others, especially when she'd catch herself second-guessing normal interactions between us. We also had to work through the lying. That was probably the hardest part for me, understanding that my wife had been so overwhelmed and confused that she'd gone along with her mother's deception. It took time for me to trust that she was being honest with me about her feelings and motivations. But slowly, things started to get better. Without her mother there to analyze and criticize every interaction, we began to rediscover what we actually liked about each other. The spontaneous hugs came back. The easy conversations returned. We started laughing together again. About 3 weeks ago, my wife decided to call her sister and get the full story about what had happened during her marriage. The details were even worse than what I'd initially been told. Her mother had convinced her sister that her husband was financially irresponsible, emotionally unavailable, and potentially unfaithful, none of which was true. She created fake evidence of problems and manipulated situations to make normal behavior seem suspicious or concerning. Learning about this pattern helped my wife understand that what happened to us wasn't personal or unique. Her mother had a systematic approach to destroying her daughter's relationships, and we'd just been the latest targets. The biggest breakthrough came when my wife decided to go no contact with her mother, at least temporarily. Her mother had been sending daily texts asking when she could come visit, making comments about hoping we'd work through our issues, and generally trying to insert herself back into our lives. My wife finally blocked her number and told her sister she needed time to heal from the manipulation without her mother's interference. Since then, it's been like living with a different person, the person I fell in love with and married, before her mother got into her head. My wife is more confident, more decisive, and more trusting of her own judgment. She's also more affectionate and spontaneous, which has been amazing to experience again. We've talked about the future a lot lately. My wife admitted that part of her mother's manipulation worked because she really did have some doubts about marriage, not about me, but about whether she was ready for such a big life change. We've decided to take things slow in some ways, focusing on building a strong foundation without outside pressure or interference. We've also talked about kids, which is something her mother used to bring up constantly, always with comments about how difficult it would be and how much our relationship would suffer. Now that we can discuss it without her mother's negative input, we're both excited about the possibility of starting a family together someday. The house feels like ours again. We've rearranged furniture, painted a few rooms, and made it feel more like a home for 2 people instead of 3. My wife even joked that she feels like she's experiencing married life for the first time, which made me both sad and happy at the same time. Her mother has tried a few times to reach out through other family members, usually with messages about how she was just trying to help and how she hopes we can work things out. My wife has been firm about maintaining boundaries, which I'm proud of her for doing. The sister who told me about her mother's pattern has become a much bigger part of our lives. She and her new boyfriend visit regularly, and it's been great to have family around who actually support our relationship instead of trying to undermine it. Looking back, I can see how close we came to losing everything. If her sister hadn't reached out, if my wife hadn't been willing to see what was happening, if I'd given up and walked away, we would have become another casualty of her mother's need to control her daughter's lives. I'm not naive enough to think we won't face challenges in the future, but at least now we'll face them together, without someone actively working to sabotage our relationship from the inside. To anyone dealing with something similar, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't be afraid to set boundaries with family members, even if it feels uncomfortable. Your marriage has to come first, or it won't survive. My wife and I are planning a small vacation next month, just the 2 of us, to celebrate getting through this mess and to focus on the future we want to build together. For the first time since our honeymoon, I'm genuinely excited about what comes next. We made it through, and we're stronger for it.